So let's begin first, as Vivek said, with the subtext of the book. And I suspect it has something to do with the times that we live in, but you don't look like a Muslim. So why did you call it that?
It also had an O. The publisher decided to drop the O. Initially it was titled, "Oh, but you don't look like a Muslim." And I think the O was important. It kind of encapsulated a whole lot of emotions. If you permit, I want to read a paragraph that actually explains why I think the O was needed. May I?
Yeah, of course, please.
I have always wondered how one is supposed to look like one's religion. Save for outward tokens such as a turban or a topi, a beard or a burqa, how can one give instant proof of one's religious beliefs? Yet, growing up in Delhi, all through school, college and university, while negotiating an assortment of jobs and offices, not to say myriad social occasions, I've heard this comment delivered in tones ranging from surprise to approval. With time, I have understood that when somebody is saying, "Oh, but you don't look like a Muslim," the speaker is trying to give me a backhanded compliment. Since I don't look like a Muslim, I'm okay. I'm not quite one of them. And who's the them? The bomb-throwing, beef-smuggling, jihad-spouting Muslim of popular imagination. By extension, I might even, at a stretch, be considered one of us.
Very well put, and I think that pretty much provides the context as to why you wrote this book and why you called it that. So let's then talk of the Islam that you follow. You've said that in the book that the Islam that...
May I just interject
yes.
you, just interrupt you for a minute?
Anytime.
This is actually a collection of 40 essays, so there is no single one thread. It's not as though the entire book is about being Muslim or being this or being that. There's some pretty innocuous stuff here also, like food and memories and other things. So we will talk of some of those.
We will talk of those. Those are the contentious parts, actually. She has some rude things to say about some ingredients of food, which we'll talk about. Yeah, it is a collection of a wide variety of things. I perhaps should have mentioned that from her travels to her encounters with Urdu, with her encounters with Delhi, and all kinds of things, really. So let's begin with the Islam that she actually follows. The Islam, you said, that I know gives more importance to the rights of people, hukukul ibad, rather than the rights of God. So tell us how you evolved this philosophy and how it works for you.
Yeah, it is actually said in a certain context. In one of the essays, an essay called "My Father Did Not Take the Train to Pakistan," the thing that Hukukul Abad and others that you are talking about is actually a quotation from Maulana Abul Kalam Azad's autobiography, which my grandfather, a teacher, has quoted in his autobiography, and I have by extension used it to kind of give a context to my own understanding of a lived, practiced Islam. I mean, I make no bones about the fact that I am a practicing Musliman, for what it's worth. And yet I find it easy to negotiate modernity, to use a loose word, to negotiate various identities, and I don't particularly see a conflict between those many identities. And this Hukuk al-Ibad and other things that you referred to, that Maulana Azad makes out to be an article of faith, that my grandfather says is the cornerstone of his identity, and how being a Muslim in India in no way comes in the way of being an Indian. I thought these were interesting things that one could maybe, well, approximate in some way.
Let me quote from the book. As I clock in a half century and a bit more, I find I have done my share of soul searching and raking over the ashes. I am done, too, with defensive or aggressive posturing, or the equally ridiculous sitting on the fence. Now, I found this very interesting. You sound a bit angry and a bit rebellious.
Yeah, well, I don't think I was being either. I think I was stating kind of a feeling that many of us feel. Just to provide a historical context here, The partition of 47 decimated the middle class among Muslims. Many went away to look for jobs, to work as doctors, engineers, as you know, in the army, in the bureaucracy in Pakistan. It's taken us 70 years to have a Muslim middle class in India, and we have a substantial presence now of a middle class. I think I represent that, and it is that fairly large majority that is never taken into account when you talk of the Muslims of India. The government, when it wishes to engage with Muslims, it engages with these jokers in costume, as I like to call them, you know. And for the rest, I mean, I also have an essay on the Shahi Imam, and I question why he's Shahi and so on. So I don't think these people are really representative of a large chunk of the population of this country, right? So people who have been silent for far too long are actually people who are stakeholders. They're actually people that the world needs to engage with and acknowledge their presence.
You've actually lived for quite a while in a very Muslim area, even if I might call it a ghetto of sorts. Now, of course, she does not. She lives in Lutyens, Delhi. Yeah, the Tony part of it. But you describe how when you lived in Jamia Nagar, is kept at Jamia Nagar is kept at arm's length by Delhi. There are very few bank branches. Pizzas are not delivered. She writes in this book about how her daughter's 12th birthday, if I remember, lots of her friends and parents refuse to send their kids over to Jamia Nagar. And many cities in the north and the west have these exclusive Muslim areas, which seem to be, in fact, growing in time. What is your prognosis for areas like this across the north and the west?
You know, Delhi is pretty snobbish about addresses. Most conversations in random, where you don't know people, it starts with where do you live, and so where you live is a marker of your identity. If you're in Tony, South Delhi, then you're somebody we want to meet. If you're Jamna Par, then okay, we may or may not want to meet you, that kind of thing. But that aside, there is something else to it. And this I discovered when I moved from South Delhi, Gulmohar Park, to live in Jamia, where I was working at the university. I actually didn't live there very long. It was the years that I was working at the university. And I saw a tectonic shift. Pizza is one thing. Now, you might well say, what's the big deal? What is so great if pizzas are delivered or if they are not delivered? That's not the point. I mean, you can live without pizzas being delivered at home. That is not the point I'm making. The point is that services such as florists, chemists, pizzas, but many other things, dry cleaners, if they are willing to go to the furthest colony of, let's say, New Friends Colony or Kalandi, which as the crow flies is really far away, but not willing to come here. Social amenities, something called Safal Mother Dairy outlets. I think also what I'm doing is that through some of these essays, I think I'm trying to call out the elephant in the room. We don't want to acknowledge these things. It's considered rude and sort of not very nice to talk about it. Increasingly, people seem to think, oh, but this doesn't really happen. And I'm trying to say, it does happen. Of course it happens. There are no dispensaries. People are referred to a private hospital down the road, which is Holy Family. A lot of government facilities. Am I moving it or something's wrong with it? So various things that people in different parts of the city, and I can say this having crossed what I call the cordon sanitaire that divides the many Delhis. I've lived in different parts of Delhi, and I can vouch for the fact that moving across that cordon sanitaire, there are things that I took for granted the other side, and when I come to this side, all of those things are missing. So I'm just asking why.
So let's switch from this. So we'll be switching from many topics because the book does that switching as well. So if you think sometimes I'm being abrupt with my questions, you can blame Rakhshanda about this.
There are actually 4 sections here: religion, culture, identity. So
yeah.
I think he's going to do a random plucking.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Now, you have a lot to say about the relationships between men and women. You've said that until men become you didn't say, of course, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan himself said this, and this surprised me because I didn't know he had said anything like this. He said until men become competent, women cannot become competent. Men will be the means of women getting educated. So all those issues of the rights of men versus those of women, the linking of modesty to religious identity or not, obviously these exercise your mind, as indeed they do many people. And you say at the heart of these tussles is the fear of debate within the Islamic clergy. Is this only a matter of preserving hegemony, and what does this have to say about leadership among Muslims? And as you recall, Gandhi as saying, the parda of the mind.
Yeah. Actually, you're asking very many questions here. Let me see how many. There's a whole bunch of things here. Starting with Sir Syed Ahmed. These papers have, the articles here come from different spaces. The Sir Syed Ahmed article was actually written for a seminar in Berlin. It was meant for a sort of academic audience, and the idea was to celebrate Sir Syed's legacy. And there I was, this lone voice of dissent, saying, this is all very well, wo qaum ke rehnuma the, he was a great visionary, and so on and so forth. And he set up an institution where none existed, but we must also look at his very regressive views when it came to women's education. And I was also laying out the reasons. It could be pragmatism, it could be various things. So that is where the first part of your question about Sir Syed comes really. And whenever the idea of women's education was raised, and remember, the people there were talking of separate but equal. I have a quarrel with that as well. Can separate be equal? That's also something I take up in one of the other essays. But in the context of Sir Syed, at that point in time, his younger contemporaries were saying, let's have a school for girls, let it be separate, but let it be along the same lines as the college for men. And it was being stalled at every stage. And it was only after Sir Syed's death that one of his younger contemporaries, Sheikh Abdullah, not to be mistaken with the Kashmir politician, but another man called Sheikh Abdullah, who popularly known as Papa Mia, who set up a college for women. So all through his life, he stalled the idea, and he said, and his reactions varied, Sir Syed. He would say, why do we need it in the first place? And the kind of traditional education that we have given to women, of course we don't want them to be jahil. We don't want them to be illiterate. We do want them to have some literacy and to be able to read the Quran and to keep household accounts. But do we want them sitting in parliament? 50 years later, they are indeed sitting in parliament. Do we want them to be telephone operators and university teachers? 50 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, they are doing all of those things. So in some ways, I think I'm also trying to say that visionary though he is, far-sighted though he is, in some ways he was also myopic when it came to women's education. And then there was a whole bunch of other things you asked.
Well, there was the whole question of, it was, to me it was related, because the whole question of relationship between men and women, you say, is also at the heart of these tussles, is the fear of debate within the Islamic clergy.
Yeah, I think that is arising more. An essay on burqa, which I call Moving Tombs for Women. I find it deeply offensive. It's an annoying garment to have to wear, that black, all-pervasive thing. It traps heat. It becomes extremely hot. It sort of hinders mobility. And the very idea of that kind of segregation, I think, is offensive to me personally. So I think it's coming from there, and you refer to Gandhi and others. Gandhi spoke up for. Interestingly, there was a time till not very long ago when people could speak up about what today we call other people's issues. Gandhi saw nothing wrong in speaking out against the burqa. Yeah, today if somebody were to do that, they say, "Ye to hamara masla hai, who are you to speak?" Right? So I think I'm citing Gandhi, I'm citing Kamala Nehru in one of her correspondence, and Kamala Nehru is saying if men were to wear it even for one day, they would know how annoying a garment this is. So there's a whole range of views I'm bringing in. And to answer your question about the clergy, I think it serves the purpose. The forces of patriarchy have always sided with maintaining the status quo. And as Samar, you and I were earlier talking, there's a whole bunch of issues, be it burqa, be it triple talaq, be it other things. If only these things were to come from within the community. It's a sad day that the Supreme Court has to step in and decide that triple talaq is wrong and bad. we had an occasion, by we I mean the Indian Muslims had an occasion all those years ago at the time of the Shah Bano case when this matter could have been settled. But at that point, it didn't seem like a good idea, and 30 years later, we have the court wagging its finger at us and saying that, you know, the triple talaq was wrong and bad. So be it the burqa, be it the triple talaq, be it various other issues, some of the things I raised through these essays is also the need for introspection of voices from within the community, questioning conventional wisdom. Islam doesn't have a clergy, so strictly speaking, the imams have no role except to lead the prayer, and that too anybody can. I mean, strictly speaking, if you were to follow the rule book, any Musliman can stand and lead the prayer. You don't have to be ordained. There is no ordained clergy in Islam. So the hegemony of the imams is also a completely fictional thing as I see it.
I mean, this is diverging a bit, but since you spoke so much about it, the whole question of wearing a hijab, etc. Now, of course, there are many women, and certainly some friends of mine, who would feel uncomfortable without it and said that it's perfectly fine. It is a mark of identity, and we are proud of that as well. What would you say to especially younger women?
Well, if it's coming from a conviction, then who am I to have any opinion? I mean, they're absolutely, the last thing I would want to do is to take a judgmental position on this. It doesn't work for me. But if there's a young woman who comes along and says this is a mark of identity she wishes to embrace, and she's not under pressure from family or elders or what have you, then how can one say don't wear it? I would hate to wear it.
Now, you've written a lot about your travels to Afghanistan, Bangladesh for the Hajj, and within those experiences you have referred to and been conscious of, if I'm not right, of being an Indian specifically. For example, you write, as an Indian Muslim traveling to Muslim countries, one carries the weight of an additional cross, that of religion versus national identity. What is one to do in such situations? So tell us what you did and what you experienced.
Okay, as luck would have it, I traveled to a bunch of Muslim countries. There was Turkey as well, which is not quite Muslim as it is now at that point when I'd gone. I haven't talked about Turkey in this essay. I talk of Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And as it happened, I went to these three places fairly close in time. So I was conscious of the idea that, especially going to Saudi Arabia, I was carrying the weight of my Muslim identity when I was going there, So I was conscious of various things. And coming back from those three places, it occurred to me that the ties of history and culture seemed stronger. I was not identifying with the people I met purely on religious lines. In fact, there was no connect whatsoever at all, actually, as it turns out. Afghanistan was very illuminating. In Afghanistan, in Kabul, for instance, I went to the university, and young women would come up to me and say, "So how's Tulsi?" And I was like, "Tulsi who?" And it turned out to be Tulsi, as in now the Honorable Minister, then playing the role of Tulsi. And it showed the extent and reach of Indian television, Indian cinema. You walk into a bazaar wearing a sari, people want to come and touch you, Hindi, and they want to talk to you. And there's a great sort of connection. And interestingly, they dislike Pakistanis very much. So wearing a sari, I was safe on the streets of Kabul, I felt. I was Hindi. India has had a long history, shared history with Afghanistan. We've had the Kabuliwala in our literature and in our short stories for a very long time. And it's a cross-fertilization between the two countries. And even now, India has helped build their ravaged roads, helped with urban renewal, helped with the parliament, helped with the framing of the constitution, so on and so forth, built hospitals.
Intelligence services work very closely.
Work very, very close. There is that as well, yes. So that was one place where I clearly felt that, the fact that we are co-religionists is completely irrelevant here. The culture, the other things, cinema, for instance, popular culture, all these ties seemed closer somehow.
related to that, you also say that by holding on to the staff of secularism, even if sometimes it means doing no more than lip service, we have managed to keep many of those demons at bay that today plague those among our neighbors who made religion the cornerstone of their national identity. How did this play out?
I can't recall exactly which essay I've said this in, but okay, off the top.
You're from your book.
Okay, and somewhere, it must be from somewhere. Off from the top of my head, let me narrate this incident. I've been to Pakistan 3 times. I don't have close family, and all 3 times was some book festival or book launch or something. At one of the book launches, there was this safari-suited gent who was sort of trailing me. And wherever I went, whichever knot of group of people I would be, he would walk up to me, and it would be at the fringes of the conversation. At one point, he walks up to me. I'm pretty convinced he was IB or something. But at some point, he walked up to me and he said, "Madam," I'm going to slip into Hindustani, I hope you'll follow. "Madam, जब आपको देख तो हमें बड़ा अफसोस होता है." The mic doesn't like any talk of Pakistan.
Perhaps.
Okay, I'll try again. So this man says that, "Madam, हम आपको देखते हैं, हमें बड़ा अफसोस होता है." So I said, trying to place him, that do I know him and why does he feel sad? He says, "हम तो आ गए, आपको छोड़ाए." And that was like somebody lit a fire under me. I said, आपको बिल्कुल तकलीफ नहीं होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि हमने बहुत अच्छा किया कि हम वहीं रहे. This is something I pick up again and again. It's there in My Father Did Not Take the Train to Pakistan. It is in various essays. But essentially, I think the tattered fabric of secularism, prone to attacks, prone to many sort of holes, and which we done every now and then. Still, it's done us well, I think. And it's something I personally think we need to hold on to in this divided world, polarized world, under attacks of various kinds. But what will, I think, see us through will be the spirit of secularism, which is a very uniquely Indian understanding of secularism. Our secularism is not the divide of church and state. It's not the French or Algerian understanding of secularism. I think it's a very sarv dharm sort of understanding, not the absence of religion. I mean, even in the early days, Nehru in India, Nehru was an atheist. But even then, as the Republic was finding its feet, I don't think anybody was saying do away with religion. Yes, do away with religion in the public domain. But it crept up on us, and we didn't sort of protest. The first time a Xerox machine was bought and a nariyal was todod and a lal nishan was put on it, why did nobody say, why are we doing this? Let's keep our religion to our homes. And it's across religions. I'm not singling out any one religion. I'm not making this out to be a case of majoritarianism versus minorities. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying secularism has worked as a philosophy of living together separately. Okay, don't give your daughters in marriage to the other. Maybe don't even go eat because you want to maintain dietary restrictions. Fair enough. It's the bigotry, it's the hatred, it's the polarization that I find problematic, And I will still say that despite everything, it is the staff of secularism really that will show the way.
You refer a lot to talking of secularism in your book, whether poetry or elsewhere, of how that secularism has been the underpinning of recent Indian history. You refer frequently, for example, to the plots of Jasusi Dunya novels and the Ram Leela delivered in Hindustani and Urdu. You talk of references to Ram, Nanak, and all kinds of other things. So has this world, you think, gone for good, and you just mentioned it again now, or does it still survive? And tell us a bit more about some of these details, which of course I think many of us might not know.
So there is a section here on literature. And it's got a bunch of things about the partition literature, for instance, that came out and so on. I wrote a series of columns for Scroll, and I was in a kind of a crusade to find, this what is the opposite of othering? I think embracing, appropriating. So there was a time when it was entirely possible, and it was indeed being done, for people to to appropriate symbols and say राम मेरे भी हैं और मैं भी बात कर सकती हूँ राम के बारे में, you know. So when I looking for it, I found vast amounts of poetry written in Urdu. A lot of my frame of reference in the section on literature happens to be Urdu literature, because over the years that is what I have been reading and translating, and there's a word for it in Hindustani, khangalna, sifting through it. So I'm trying to look for things that kind of I can join the dots somewhere. And one of them is this thing of appropriating, of saying that yes, I can write on Iqbal, the much derided Iqbal. You know, in our school time we sang his Sare Jahan Se Acha Hamara in our school choir. But today, Pilibhit principal is suspended because the kids in his school sing Lappe Aati Hai Dua Ban Ke Tamanna Meri. What is wrong with Lappe Aati Hai Dua? It's a child's prayer. But because Iqbal has written it, it is suspect. Now, the same Iqbal has actually written some beautiful lyrics on Nanak, for instance, whom he calls Marde Kamil. Something that is derived from Western philosophy, the notion of perfect man, of perfection in man. And he is calling Nanak a perfect man, a Marde Kamil. Similarly, stuff on Ram, whom he calls Ram-e-Hind, Imam-e-Hind, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole section here in this book, again on Krishan. Krishan Ji Maharaj has this beautiful poetry written on Krishan in Urdu. One poet in particular, Hasrat Mohani, I'm a complete fangirl when it comes to Hasrat Mohani. Here's this incredible man. Allow me to talk a little about Hasrat. I mean, he's quite my hero actually. A poet, politician, a poet in the high register, the classical ghazal, Chupke Chupke Raat Din Aasu Bahana Yaad Hai, which Allam Ali and others have sung. Beautiful romantic poetry. Also the man who uses Inqalab Zindabad for the first time as a slogan in 1925 in a trade union rally in Calcutta. 1925, when the CPI starts, Hasrat Mohani is there in the reception committee. So he's member of the CPI, he leaves the CPI, he joins the Congress, leaves the Congress, joins the Muslim League, leaves the Muslim League, comes back to the Congress. By the time partition happens, he says, I'm going to stay on here, I'll be the conscientious objector. So this maverick man with all kinds of, we only have 10 minutes left. Hasrat Mohani is a practicing Musliman, goes to the Hajj, I'm told 11 times, and goes to Vrindavan, is a Krishna Bhakt and sees no duality. You know, he's this Dadidar Maulana. Again, I mean, I'm saying how easy it is to box people in stereotypes. The progressives, good, fine people though they are, at a conference in Hyderabad in 1945, are trying to move a resolution to say that let's ban obscenity from literature. Our wings have been burnt by all this talk of obscenity, and Manto and Ismat and others are actually damaging the progressive cause, so let's just ban obscenity from literature. Now who stands up and objects? Maulana Hasrat Mohani. He raises his hand and says, I object. You first make a distinction, Latif Havas Nagari. It's a long debate, I don't want to go into the details. The point I'm trying to say is, here is this man who is a combination of seeming contraries. And I think that brings me to what we were trying to say earlier, we must celebrate diversities. I'm vast, I contain multitudes, Walt Whitman tells us. It could well have been written for India. It is vast, it does contain multitudes. Why do we want to flatten them? Why do we want to erase them? And why do we want a monochromatic, linear, single worldview? Why do we want to go into a garden and have only one flower in only one color?
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you for that. I have, of course, more questions, and I have lots more questions, but I think we have less than 10 minutes left, and we'll open it up for questions if anyone asks, if anyone has any questions. If not, I have more. So please, feel free.
do not think we need to splice a language from its script. However, being sister languages, एक ही माँ से जनी हुई दो ज़बानें अगर हैं तो वो हिंदी और उर्दू हैं, vocabularies उनकी फ़र्क हो जाती हैं, but उनकी grammar एक ही है, syntax एक ही है. So yes, by all means, Devanagari is a nice way of entering that language, but I think it's not a substitute. I think it should not replace the script.
That's not what I had in mind. I'm sorry. That's not what I had in mind. Not the question is script. The question that I have in mind, which I think may be tied up with the larger question of secularism, is there a middle ground between Urdu and Hindi, irrespective of the script, which could be identified as Hindustani?
Actually, I see the great bulk of Urdu literature as being very Catholic, if I may use it in a sense, as you understand, not in a religious sense, but as in all-embracing. And all these examples that I've been giving all this past half hour, these are examples of the Catholicity of Urdu, if anything, of the progressive impulse, really, Priya, of Urdu. So I don't think we need another plan to further. If anything, we just need to revisit. I think revisiting those texts, finding lost voices, highlighting neglected voices might just do our work.
I wanted to ask you about, you talked about secularism in terms of Sarva Dharma Sambhav a little earlier. Is that really a reasonable recipe for secularism?
But has it not worked for a very long time?
No, I don't think it's worked. That's why I'm asking.
My sense is, actually, I'm sorry, I do disagree there. I think it has worked in a sense of, it compartmentalizes various things. Like I said, maintain differences that you think are contentious about intermarriage, and so ideally I think intermarriage is the way forward, because you open your home, your family, and family is a unit from where all differences emerge. So personally speaking, I think that is the way forward. In a larger context, I think secularism as Sarvadharma also works. And in my experience, really religious, truly religious people are respectful and mindful of other people's religions. It's the bigots who are not. And bigots are seldom religious. I mean, they're just bigots. So let's shout them down, no? Let's be louder. Nehru called them the strident illiberals. So let us become the strident liberals.
One last question. Ma'am, first of all, after listening to you, this has been one of the more, I think, positive and optimistic session, because last 2 days we have been hearing a lot of like doomsday, negative, thinking that everything is going wrong.
I don't think we planned that, Samar. We were wanting to do a lot of chest beating, but
yeah, but it is really nice to hear you. There is one reference you made to the middle class Muslims, but there seems to be a lack of leadership that is spoken or is heard in the normal discourse. So what do you think, what are the reasons? Is it because, like the middle class Hindus who probably do not vote like as a bunch, is it the same with the community, or is that we are not aware of these leaders?
I think after Maulana Azad there has been no Muslim leader. I mean, Salman Khurshid or anybody else would be a Congress leader, not a Muslim leader, which is not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Owaisi, for example, projects himself as a Muslim leader, but he has a limited base in the Ahmedabad area. When he tried to go to Bihar electorally, he was not very successful. There are no easy answers here. Do I really want a Muslim leader? I certainly don't want an imam as a Muslim leader, that I know. But then who do I want as a Muslim leader, and why do I want a Muslim leader? We talked about secularism earlier. I think we've reached a point where the minorities should not just hold up the flag of secularism. I think the majority also has to stand up and say, count me in. Why do the Muslims in India need a specifically Muslim leader? Why can't X, Y, or Z and say, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to make common cause, this is my cause as well as anybody else's. So I'm not saying this is the way it should be or the way it is. I'm just saying, I'm not entirely sure in my mind that I want a Muslim leader, or I'm going to vote for a Muslim leader, or I only vote for a Muslim from my area. Frankly, no Muslim has ever stood from the neighborhood where I live, but hypothetically speaking, if one were to, would I want to vote for him just because he's a Muslim? And maybe he has some very regressive views. Would I still want to vote for him? I don't think so.
On that very hopeful, thoughtful note, we'll end. But because I have the mic, I'm going to just finish it off. And we have 1 minute, Vivek. So I just want to read what she said, and I think that pretty much sums it up. In the very ordinariness of the events, people, places, occasions, sentiments brought to life through these short essays, possibly you will find an echo of your own lives. Possibly there will be something here to make you pause and share my delight in my cultural legacy, or grieve with me when I see the richly textured tapestry of my country being torn by divisive communal forces. Possibly I will stop hearing the exclamation that has haunted me my entire life. Oh, but you don't look like a Muslim. Possibly then I will also free myself from the tag of Indian Muslim, Muslim Indian. Thank you.
Viva.